Tonight, a teacher is sleeping in her car. She has a degree, she has a job. She shows up every morning, teaches 30 kids, and clocks out after 8 hours. She does everything right. And when the school day ends, she drives to a parking lot 3 blocks away and tries to sleep before doing it all again tomorrow. She is not in any government database. No federal report accounts for her. No funding decision was made with her in mind. As far as official statistics are concerned, she doesn't exist. And she is not alone, not even close. Today, we're going to talk about the real scale of homelessness in America, not the number politicians cite, not the figure that gets repeated on the news, the real one, the one hiding in plain sight. And by the end of this, you'll understand why this crisis is already much closer to your life than you've been told. Here is the official count of homeless Americans on any given night: 650,000. That number gets cited in congressional hearings. It shapes billions of dollars in federal funding decisions. Journalists repeat it without question. Politicians build policy around it. Now here's how it's actually produced. Once a year, volunteers go out on a single night, typically in winter, and count the people they can physically see. People in shelters, people in tents, people sleeping visibly on sidewalks. That's the methodology. One night, once a year. A visual snapshot of people who happen to be in public spaces at a specific moment in January. Think about everything that method cannot possibly capture. It misses people sleeping in cars and vans. It misses families doubled up in a single apartment with nowhere else to go. It misses people cycling through motels, storage units, and friends' couches every few weeks. People who are genuinely homeless but invisible to anyone counting on a winter sidewalk. Here is the number that exposes the gap. The U.S. Department of Education tracks homeless students separately, using a broader definition of housing instability. Their count found over 1.3 million public school students identified as homeless in a single academic year. Just the children. That number already exceeds the entire official national homeless count for all ages combined. Let that land for a second. The children alone outnumber the official total, which means the 650,000 figure isn't a slight undercount, it isn't a rounding error. It's a structural blind spot so large that millions of real people, working people, families, children, fall completely through it every single year. And when the numbers are wrong, the response is always too small. The gap between the real scale of this crisis and the resources available to address it grows wider every year. Not because nobody cares, because the system is measuring the wrong thing. Most people picture homelessness a specific way: an older man, a mental health crisis, a substance problem, someone whose choices led them here. The data tells a completely different story. Studies across major American cities show that between 30 and 40% of homeless adults are currently employed, some full-time, some working 2 or 3 jobs simultaneously, and that percentage is rising every year. How is that possible? Median rent has surpassed $2,000 a month in most major cities. A full-time worker earning $18 an hour takes home roughly $2,800 after taxes. Once rent is paid, almost nothing remains, no buffer, no margin for anything unexpected. And things always go unexpected. One missed shift, one car repair, one medical bill. The numbers don't just tighten, they collapse. Warehouse workers sleep in vehicles near the distribution centers where they work. Healthcare aides live in vans blocks from the hospitals where they care for patients. Teachers stay in motels during the week because commuting from somewhere affordable isn't viable anymore. This is not an anecdote. This is documented by unions, school districts, and city governments across the country. Between 2020 and 2024, rents in cities like Miami, Phoenix, Tampa, and Austin rose between 50 and 70%. Wages for most workers rose 15 to 20%. That gap, that specific mathematical gap, is the direct mechanism pushing millions of households over the edge. A family paying $1,200 a month in 2020 might face a renewal at $1,900 today. Same unit, same building. That $700 difference isn't a luxury cut. It's a month of groceries, it's a car payment, it's gone. When full-time work no longer guarantees a roof, homelessness stops being a social problem. It becomes an economic signal, a warning light that almost nobody in power is reading. The fastest growing form of homelessness in America doesn't appear in tent encampments. It parks legally when it can, moves when it has to, and works hard not to be noticed. In Los Angeles County alone, more than 100,000 people are estimated to be living in vehicles right now. Fewer than half appear in any official count. In Seattle, San Diego, Phoenix, and Austin, vehicle communities have expanded significantly, clustering near hospitals, warehouses, and distribution centers where overnight parking is less likely to be challenged. A vehicle offers something shelters often don't: privacy, security, the ability to keep a job. For many people, living in a car isn't the worst option, it's the best one available. But it's precarious in ways that are hard to appreciate from the outside. A transmission failure isn't an inconvenience, it's a housing emergency. Then there are the groups almost nobody talks about. Seniors are now one of the fastest growing homeless populations in the country. The math is simple and brutal. The average monthly Social Security payment is roughly $1,700. Average monthly rent in most American cities now exceeds that figure. There is no path between those two numbers without additional income or significant subsidy. And for millions of older Americans, neither exists. Rising property taxes, increasing insurance costs, prescription drug bills, rent increases. Together, they form a compounding pressure that people on fixed incomes simply cannot outrun. Every year, these costs rise faster than Social Security adjustments. More seniors get pushed closer to the edge. And then there are the children. Over 1.3 million students identified as homeless in a single school year. Living in cars, motels, overcrowded apartments, many of their families avoid shelters deliberately to keep children enrolled at a familiar school, to protect them from overcrowded facilities, to keep the crisis invisible so the family can keep functioning. The consequences show up clearly in the data. Childhood housing instability connects directly to lower academic performance, higher dropout rates, and health impacts that follow people well into adulthood. School systems across the country have quietly become frontline responders to a housing crisis they were never built to address. Here is the explanation you hear most often for why people end up homeless: mental illness, addiction, personal failure. The correlation is real, but the direction of causation is largely backwards from what most people assume. Studies of people entering homelessness for the first time consistently show that the majority had no significant mental health diagnosis before losing their housing. What the research documents instead is the development of mental health symptoms as a direct response to homelessness itself. Chronic sleep deprivation, constant threat of displacement, total loss of privacy, the daily weight of managing survival with almost no resources. These are severe, sustained stressors that produce measurable psychological damage in otherwise healthy people. Anxiety, depression, hypervigilance, and trauma responses consistent with PTSD develop within months of housing loss across every demographic studied. In surveys across multiple cities, over half of newly homeless adults reported no serious mental health condition before losing their housing. This matters enormously for policy. When homelessness gets framed as primarily a mental health problem, solutions lean toward clinical intervention. But mental health treatment delivered without stable housing consistently produces poor outcomes. Stabilization requires shelter first. When the order is reversed, treatment stalls, costs rise, and people cycle endlessly through expensive systems without ever reaching stability. Homelessness doesn't primarily select for people with pre-existing problems. In many cases, it creates those problems. By placing people in conditions no human mind was designed to sustain indefinitely. Cities have responded to visible homelessness mostly with enforcement, anti-camping laws, vehicle restrictions, towing campaigns. In 2024, the Supreme Court expanded the legal basis for these tools, and local governments moved quickly. The political appeal is obvious. Enforcement makes homelessness less visible, and in politics, less visible is often treated as the same thing as solved. But enforcement doesn't reduce homelessness, it relocates it. Fines for homelessness-related violations run $250 to $1,000. Someone who cannot afford rent cannot pay a $500 fine. That unpaid fine becomes a warrant. That warrant complicates every future housing application. The system designed to push people toward stability pulls the floor out from under them instead. Towing is worse. Reclaiming a towed vehicle typically costs between $1,500 and $3,000 in fees. The vehicle is gone. The shelter is gone. The job disappears the same day because the transportation and the housing were the same thing. Meanwhile, the official safety net, emergency shelters, operate at or above 95% capacity in most major cities year-round. Wait lists for housing assistance stretch months, sometimes years. And shelters come with conditions that cut off large portions of the people who need them most. Couples separated at intake, no pets, sobriety requirements, no privacy. The system was built for a different scale of problem. Short-term emergencies, small numbers, temporary disruptions. It was never designed to serve as a permanent substitute for millions of people priced out of the housing market by structural failures in wages, healthcare, and construction policy. When that becomes its function, it doesn't adapt, it fractures. Here is a number worth sitting with. More than 60% of Americans report living paycheck to paycheck. Nearly 40% say they couldn't cover a $400 emergency without borrowing or selling something. That group that considers itself safely distant from the crisis is considerably smaller than most people assume. One missed paycheck, one unexpected bill, one layoff notice. The distance between stability and housing instability for tens of millions of American households is not a matter of years, it's a matter of weeks. This crisis is not concentrated in a handful of cities. It is not the product of individual failure. It is not a mental health problem that got out of hand. It is what happens when housing costs disconnect from wages across an entire country, simultaneously, while the systems meant to catch people quietly run out of capacity. The math is not complicated. What's missing is the will to take it seriously at the scale it actually deserves. Millions of people are doing exactly what was supposed to work, showing up, working, paying their bills, and finding that the system they were promised no longer adds up to a roof over their heads. This is not a personal failure, it's a policy failure. And the first step towards fixing it is being honest about how big it actually is. If this gave you a clearer picture of what's really happening, share it with someone who needs to see it. And subscribe, because next week we're going to look at the one policy approach that has actually worked, and why almost no American city is willing to use it.